certainly by Nichiren Daishonin's time in Japan, and even to this very day, there are countless thousands, indeed millions, of people practicing Buddhism who don't know about it or choose to ignore it. This is strange, isn't it? Without a doubt, of course, it's partly due to the provisional teachings becoming entrenched in various parts of the world before ever the Lotus Sutra was taught. Shakyamuni taught for more than 40 years before he actually taught the Lotus Sutra. That was a hell of a long time. Not everybody stayed with him for all those 40 years. They moved off down into India and Ceylon, into Southeast Asia, and started to teach the teachings they knew, which may have been Hinayana. They never heard about the Lotus Sutra. And gradually, over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, that became embedded in the culture of that country. People's vested interests were in it. Perhaps also, Hinayana had its value politically, because it taught really that when you were in a particular world, that was your world. And as such, it bred apathy and a sort of feeling there was nothing you could do about your fate, which, without question of doubt, has been used by evil politicians in the history of those countries. So, for one reason or another, the provisional teachings have persisted century after century. Another reason, too, is that Lotus Sutra is very difficult to understand. It's written in a poetic, flowery language, which was the language of many great teachers of those times 3,000 years ago, and indeed in less time than that, because where it was in verse or poetry, it was easier to remember. This is why many of those great teachers of the past taught in rhyming verse, or they taught by describing incredible, fantastic stories in order to illustrate and explain their point. Even the Arabian Nights, usually those stories have a moral, but the moral is wrapped up in these romantic and almost fairy-like stories. This was the method of teaching so that people remembered in the days when there were very few people who could write. So, no doubt, at the time of the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni taught it for 8 years. For 8 solid years, he tried to make sure that certainly his closest disciples understood it. But it's quite understandable that thousands of years later, people can read the Lotus Sutra and can't understand a single word of it. You go to the bookstore now and buy an English translation of the Lotus Sutra, and you'll see what I mean. It's extremely difficult to understand. So it took the minds of scholarly and enlightened people to really unravel it. After all, Mr. Toda spent a couple of years in prison, occupying his mind with the meaning of one passage from the Lotus Sutra. At last, he understood it, which was an incredible moment for him. But he'd been going through a spiritual, mental struggle for all that long time before it had any meaning to him. Nichiren Daishonin said this about this confusion. When a tower construction is over, the scaffold should be removed. The tower is the Lotus Sutra, and the scaffold the rest of the sutras. Like a scaffold to a tower, it was solely in order to preach the Lotus Sutra that the Buddha taught various other sutras. In other words, leading the way to the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, which was supreme in itself. So, the Lotus Sutra, on the contrary, as opposed to those provisional teachings, taught about the whole of life. Though difficult to understand, the essence of everything necessary was there. Nichiren Daishonin, when the age of Mappo appeared, the age when Shakyamuni said the Lotus Sutra would be necessary to give people happiness, when Nichiren Daishonin began his studies, delved into all the sutras, provisional, until he finally came to the Lotus Sutra. In order, what? He was already understood life. He was already enlightened, but he had to justify it to the Buddhist scholars and the people of his day. And he was able to do so through his understanding of the Lotus Sutra. So, of course, the Lotus Sutra is very much concerned with this life, with the way life ticks, and it is the beginning of the explanation of Ichinen Sanzen, which I mentioned earlier. At the time the Lotus Sutra was taught by Shakyamuni, there was another matter that still hadn't been cleared up. The provisional sutras all taught that people in the worlds of learning and partial enlightenment could never attain Buddhahood. You recite every day part of his words on that point when he covered it in the Lotus Sutra itself. These were the words to Sharihatsu, the wisest of all his disciples. Because these men were so conceited, it was said previously, so self-opinionated, so unwilling to listen to others, they would never actually, because they wouldn't carry out the Buddha's teaching exactly as he taught, they would never attain enlightenment. So still up to the time the Lotus Sutra was taught, those two categories, people in those two worlds, still according to the teachings, couldn't attain Buddhahood. Therefore, of course, Buddhahood up to that point still wasn't for every human being, was it? Still, they were an exception. So also, up to that time, Shakyamuni had not said that far from just attaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in India, he had in fact attained enlightenment eons and eons previously at a time called Gohyaku Tengo. But this also was an important point, or if you like, a missing link in the universality of Buddhism. If he had appeared to be self-enlightened under the Bodhi tree, he would have been, in those days especially, looked upon as a god. But he, above all things, wanted it to be clear that Buddhism was for every human being. So he explained that he too was an ordinary human being with the 10 worlds, and he had been taught by a teacher in the age of Gohyaku Jintengo. Also, in fact, there was another value in him saying this point about his enlightenment eons previously, because this meant that he was a Buddha of the depth and understanding to be able to teach something so profound as the Lotus Sutra, convincing to the scholars of those days and subsequent days. Okay, so far. Now we go to the essential teaching and the theoretical teaching. And in a way, this is rather complicated. So I really want to make this comparison, which entirely concerns the Lotus Sutra, in the form of two invisible headings. Invisible, that is to say, we haven't got a diagram for them because it'd be too much to put on a diagram. So the essential teaching and the theoretical teaching are the first half and the second half, or rather vice versa, of the Lotus Sutra. The theoretical teaching is the first 14 chapters, and the essential teaching is the last 14 chapters of that 28-chapter sutra. So in the theoretical teachings, a fairly sketchy theoretical idea of Buddhahood and of the fact that Buddha was in every human being was explained. Still in that theoretical teaching, Shakyamuni was a Buddha enlightened in India 40 years previously. In the theoretical teaching, Shakyamuni began to expound the theory of Ichinen Sanzen, but he didn't in any way do it completely. As you know, you recite Nyoze So, Nyoze Sho, Nyoze Tai, Nyoze Riki, and so on every time you do Gongyo, every time you recite that theoretical chapter called the Hoben chapter. And this is the 10 factors which are part of the theory of Ichinen Sanzen. 10 by 10 worlds included in the 10 worlds is 100, multiplied by 10 factors, which express those 10 worlds, which is 1,000, multiplied by the 3 realms in which you express those worlds, yourself, society, and the environment or land, is 3,000. So he gave a partial explanation only in the theoretical teaching. He did say in the theoretical teaching that Sharihotsu and other people in the worlds of learning and absorption could attain Buddhahood. This was a very important point for us today, because we are all today in the worlds of learning and absorption, certainly in the West. Because of the high standard of education, the availability of books, the way knowledge can come to us so easily. So the people of two vehicles were able to attain enlightenment. And this meant, in that Hoben chapter, that for the first time ever, Shakyamuni had said all human beings can attain enlightenment. He didn't say when, nor did he say how long it would take. Nor did he say how to attain enlightenment. Another point which he mentioned in this theoretical teaching, the first 14 chapters, was that the essence or the true entity of life, which we now know as Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, is in every single phenomena. The entity or essence of life is shared by every single phenomena that we see in the whole universe, which began to prove the interdependency of all those phenomena, whether they're human phenomena or stars, and so on. So really those were the main points in that theoretical Hoben chapter. The essential teachings, which were mainly the 16th chapter, which we know as the Juryo chapter, Fathoming the Buddhism Wisdom chapter, these were very important indeed. So in the 16th chapter, Shakyamuni, for the first time, said, I am not a Buddha, self-enlightened under the Bodhi tree. 40 or so years ago, I became a Buddha in Gohyaku Jintengo, and I also practiced the Bodhisattva austerity under a teacher. So this was an absolute revelation. And in a sense, this was Shakyamuni Buddha's Ho Shaku Kempon. He discarded his identity, his transitory identity, as that Buddha under the Bodhi tree, and revealed his true identity as the Buddha of the harvest. Of course, this was understood later. It's difficult for people to understand at that time. So he had eons and eons previously sowed the seed of Buddhahood in others, having had the seed sown in him by his own master. So also in saying that he too was taught, he made it clear that he was not in any sense a Superman, an ordinary human being who had worked his way and struggled to attain Buddhahood. Also in the Juryo chapter, the theory of Ichinen Sanzen is extended by reference to the three realms, which you remember I'd said were not included in the theoretical chapter. The actuality of life. The Juryo chapter is very concerned with the actuality of life, the three realms in which we express our Buddhahood, our own life, society, and the land. And further on from there, Shakyamuni revealed in this chapter the aspect of enlightenment, or the qualities, or no, not qualities. What is the word we use? The three truths, the aspect of enlightenment, the three aspects. That is to say, that Buddhahood is revealed in all three aspects, just the same as all the other worlds are. That is to say, in your physical or material part of life, in your spiritual, and in the very entity of life itself, the core and kernel of it. So in all aspects, Buddhahood can be revealed in every aspect of life. He refers again to the mutual possession of the 10 worlds, which had been hinted at previously. The fact that hell is in the world of Buddha, Buddha is in the world of hell. Again, that Buddhahood is a human state. And though it took Nichiren Daishonin to reveal it and teach it, he referred in a hidden way to the true cause of Buddhahood, which is to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. The title of the sutra itself, in its Japanese sounds to Chinese characters, is Myoho Renge Kyo. The title in all Buddhist teachings conveys the whole teaching. Rather like England conveys, if you think about the word England and someone says it to you, and you're standing, having been 6 years in Africa or India, the word England conjures up the whole of England in all its aspects, doesn't it? The word England conveys green fields, farms, dirty old London, and so on. Myoho Renge Kyo conveys the whole meaning of the sutra itself. So I think those are the main points revealed in those two parts of the Lotus Sutra, and it's very evident that the most important part of all is the Juryo chapter, the essential teaching. And finally, Nichiren Daishonin took the Buddhism of sowing and the Buddhism of the harvest. And I've already explained this to you. The difference between the two sorts of Buddhism. The Buddhism of Shakyamuni, in which the seed was sown countless eons ago, and through lifetime after lifetime, through the causes people made, that seed became mature and eventually was harvested on the appearance of Shakyamuni Buddha again. And Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, where sowing, maturing, and reaping occur in one lifetime. So there's a huge difference between the two. So, of course, Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, in which one attains Buddhahood in one lifetime, is strong medicine. This was what Shakyamuni Buddha referred to in the story of the excellent physician in the Lotus Sutra. Again, we recite it, don't we, every time we recite the main part of the Juryo chapter. Story of the excellent physician and his wayward children who for various reasons wouldn't, many of them, drink the incredible medicine which their father produced to overcome the poison which they'd eaten by mistake when they were playing in the yard. Some of them would take it, many of them wouldn't. Eventually, those who wouldn't began to see the sense of taking it and did so on. But in this story, Nichiren Daishonin is showing how karma, the working of the three poisons in our lives, dictate whether we can accept that incredible medicine called Nam-myoho Renge Kyo or not. So in this final stage appears the comparison of the true cause and the true effect. And of course, they in turn reveal the true law. This is why Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism is called true Buddhism. True cause, true effect, and the true law. The true cause in the Buddhism of sowing, which is Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. The true effect in one lifetime, provided you work at it, of attaining Buddhahood, and the true law of the universe, which is Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. And these were expounded by the person we therefore call the true Buddha, the Buddha of the true cause, the true cause of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So I think we're nearly at the end. Don't despair that there are and another diagram we haven't touched, because so far as this lecture is concerned, that takes very little time. As I said earlier on, there is another system of comparisons which was devised by a great high priest called Nichiren Shonin, 26th high priest. This was called the Threefold Secret Teaching. And this system of comparison was very similar in a way to Nichiren Daishonin's, and he based it on the third, fourth, and fifth stages. And his purpose was to delve more deeply into the ultimate drawing out of the true teaching of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo from the Juryo chapter. This is why he concentrated on the third, fourth, and fifth stages, in order to clarify in terms of his day and age what Nichiren Daishonin had taught in the earlier fivefold comparison. And there is also another system of categorization, which is called the 5 stages of the 3-term comparison. This was taught by Nichiren Daishonin in another great thesis called The True Object of Worship, Hanjin no Honzon Sho. So in this particular system of comparison, the stages are as explained below at the lower part of the diagram, from 1 to 5, very similar to the fivefold comparison that you did earlier. But his analysis has a different approach. His analysis is based on the 3-term comparison, which is quoted at the top. In other words, he studied those various stages and categorized them under preparation, revelation, and transmission, which are the ways in which the Buddhas have always taught. In other words, he was analyzing the teachings of Shakyamuni from a different aspect to the aspect contained in the fivefold comparison. And this is important also to grasp that the Buddha always taught in this way: preparation, revelation, transmission. Because this in turn is the way in which we should always teach. So you must always prepare the way, mustn't you? If you reveal a truth like a bolt from the blue, people's minds aren't orientated towards it. They can't possibly take it in. But if you carefully prepare the way, then they will understand the truth when it's revealed, or have the greatest chance of doing so. And thirdly, not only must you teach the truth, but you must give instruction about how that truth is going to be taught to others or transmitted. So this is in no sense remote from our present life. And we all make mistakes in not following this system, which the wisdom of the Buddhas invented. You can think of times maybe where you've heard people ringing up on the telephone and diving into the main point before that person's mind the other end even knows what they're talking about. We should think of this before we announce something at a discussion meeting. It's no good just suddenly announcing it. It hits people and goes out again, or in through one ear and out the other. But if before you make that announcement, you just make a little preparation so that their minds, everybody's minds are orientated towards what is going to come, then when it comes, they'll understand it. And furthermore, it's no good revealing a truth, say that European summer course is from the 5th to whatever it is of July. We do hope, you'll come and take part in it, unless also there is information about how that news can be spread on from there to others, and all the details that need to go with that spreading, such as how much it costs and all the rest of it. So this is really a golden teaching: preparation, revelation, and transmission. Something we can apply not only to our Buddhist activities when we take responsibilities as leaders or as cashiers and have to make announcements to others, but also, especially, of course, when we're having to lecture or talk, but also of inestimable value, isn't it, in business and every other aspect of life. So this particular approach is a very valid and important one, perhaps particularly in our logical Western ways of thinking. So that's enough for tonight, and I really thank you very much for listening carefully to what is not so easy to follow. And I'd just like to say before concluding that this will be the last lecture on the study manual for quite some time. As you may know, there was a long gap in the Seikyo Times when study manual didn't appear, and we shall have the same gap. And during that gap, we're going to tackle two great Gosho. One is Kanjin no Honzon Sho, and the other is, that is to say, the true object of worship, and the other is the Kaimosha Sho, the opening of the eyes. So these are fundamental theses in Nichiren Daishonen's Buddhism. Kanjin no Honzon Sho, looking at the object of worship from the aspect of the law, and the other, Gosho Kaimosha Sho, from the aspect of the person. So each of those theses are quite long and will be covered in a series of lectures. And since they also contain the great spirit of Nichiren Daishonin,